Hey everybody, just wanted to share a video based upon a question that I asked in our chess.com Improvers Club. And basically in the Ask Coach Ask community forum, where I try to be as active as I can, I presented this position and said, okay, with white to move, what would you play here? Black just played rook f to c8, attacking your queen. This is actually a position that I encountered in the book Sherlock's Method. And one of the authors, woman grandmaster Sabina Feuser, has the white pieces here, and she has to figure out how to deal with this problem. What would you play as white? Feel free to pause the video and think about your next move. And I'm already noticing a number of answers in the forum, so appreciate everybody sharing their ideas. And I have to admit, I struggled quite a bit. Now, with white to move, the first thought is, what is my opponent up to? What do they want to do? Well, they'll be happy to win our queen, right? So some people mention the possibility of moving our queen, somewhere reasonable. And perfectly possible to do exactly that. And, worst case scenario, that's what we'll play. On the other hand, with white to move, do we need to react? Probably, right? Most of the time our queen is hanging. We don't want to lose our queen, but what else might we think about? Well, if we look for ways to counterattack the king, we might see rook d8 or queen d8, but I don't think that's really leading anywhere. So do we have any other targets to think about? Well, we could try to counter their queen, but how exactly would we do that? Am I going to attack the queen with a move like h4? Well, what if they just take anyway? Do we have a clear follow-up? Maybe not. So here it might feel pretty compelling to move our queen, but I am overlooking a key detail. I'm looking at ways to attack the king. Okay, we don't really believe in any checks just yet. We could take a rook, but it doesn't look good, losing our queen. We could take that rook, not liking that either. But one thing I am noticing, the bishop here is only currently directly defended by the queen. So what if I play rook takes bishop? When I looked at other lines, we could basically reject them in one move, right? Like take a rook, lose your queen. Not good. Take a rook, lose your queen. Not a fan. Throw in a check, lose more material. Doesn't feel correct. So therefore, what else might we play? By looking at rook c5, you might not find an immediate move that will disconnect your interest in the line. And what I mean by that is I take the bishop, I'm backing up my queen, but more to the point, I'm countering their queen. So if I play rook takes bishop and you take my queen, I'll take your queen, and at the end of the day, I'm up a piece. So that already feels encouraging. So going back, let's kind of dig in a little bit more deeply. If I play rook takes bishop and they take our queen, well, then we're winning a piece. But what if I play rook takes bishop and they take our rook like so? That might make us feel discouraged. I'll show that on the board. I take the bishop, they take with the queen, and now we might say, oh, my queen is still hanging. I gave up one of my rooks for a bishop. I'm down a little bit of material. Doesn't feel great. But one interesting theme to notice is a piece that's nearly hanging. In other words, if this queen moved away somehow, I make a random move, queen moves away, this bishop would then be hanging. And okay, our own queen is hanging, so I understand we need to deal with that. But the main point I want to emphasize here is how a piece that is only defended once directly is nearly hanging. If we can get that queen to move away, we could win a bishop. And so by finding rook takes bishop, we mentioned the queen taking the rook could be initially kind of discouraging. Like, oh, okay, the rook is x-raying the defense of the queen here. Our queen is still hanging. We're down material, right? But then again, here's that idea of a nearly hanging piece. The queen is nearly hanging, meaning if I take that queen, it is nearly hanging, if not for the rook. So one way to think about that, the queen is on the top of the ladder and the rook is on the bottom, trying to hold that ladder steady. And so if you can remove the piece kind of holding the ladder from the bottom, what's going to happen to the queen? It's going to tip and the queen will fall off, right? So here we can play rook d8, a really cool idea. We attack the king and we also, of course, confront the rook. But more to the point, if the rook captures our rook, Now that nearly hanging queen is hanging. Free queen, right? So that is something that encouraged me when I was calculating. Rook d8 is a really cool move, and if the king moves over to h7, now we have another interesting detail. We can play not rook takes rook, trying to remove the guard and win the queen, because then the rook kind of hurries to grab the base of the ladder and keeps the queen stable, but rather we can play queen takes queen, highlighting the overworked rook. The rook is both dealing with our rook and our queen. So if the rook captures our queen, there goes their other rook. And at the end of the day, we're up a piece, right? They can pin our bishop, but then the king is just in time to defend, and we're up a full piece. So that is feeling really good. So long story long, I found the idea rook takes bishop and became very excited about the tactical possibilities. Now, one thing that became kind of complicated is when I looked at rook takes bishop, countering the queen captured the rook, and I found rook d8. Although I felt very good about the possibilities here for white, I also had some doubts because after the rook captures our rook, we happily collect the queen. Things are not yet so easy. I mean, we're up some material, things feel good, but our king, as safe as it may appear, is a little bit, stuck on the back rank. And after the move rook b to c8, I couldn't quite find a clean solution. I know I'm up material, meaning this feels great, but black is still kicking and making the game super complicated. So what I calculated was, okay, let's say that I take one pawn or the other. I ultimately decided to take the a7 pawn. Well, now the rook moves down to c1. It attacks and pins the bishop to my king. And all of a sudden, things felt a little bit annoying, right? Like if I move my king to f1, the rook is coming down. And if I play queen a5, attacking the rook, guarding the bishop, well, here comes the other rook, creating this powerful rook battery across the first rank. And, king f1 adds a second defender. I felt okay about the position because if the rook captures the bishop, I'm very happy to enter the endgame, this pawn ending. And why do I feel so happy about it? Because I'm ready to push a pawn up the board, and that king is nowhere near our pawns. So if the king tries to kind of race over to the queen side, it's a little bit slow. I'm going to promote before that king has anything to say about it. Take and take. Now I'm in a square here, the square of the pawn, meaning if the opposing king is unable to get into that square right here, right now, it cannot catch the pawn. And that is the case here. The king can kind of approach the square, but then I shrink the box again, and there's no way to catch my pawn in time before I promote. So I felt very good about that. But on the other hand, was black forced to blunder? No, unfortunately not. Here, I was calculating, from afar, from the beginning of the position, I noticed black has kind of an interesting move, b6. And all of a sudden, things feel a little bit annoying. If I move my queen to b4, keeping things safe with my bishop here, I couldn't quite figure out how to deal with rook b1. If I ever move my queen away, that is off of this diagonal, well then, mate in one's a bit of a problem. So if I go here to try to, hold on to my bishop, well now the rook continues to shadow my queen. And if I try to keep my queen on the same diagonal, I don't really have a way to escape this perpetual attack against my queen. So I found that to be really annoying. And at the end of the day, after the pawn moved to b6, I concluded I'm going to play queen a8, check the king, force it to h7, and now I'm going to play the move g3. That's as far as I calculated from the beginning and concluded white was doing very well. And it turned out I was not quite correct here. The rook is able to take the bishop. I move my king to g2. Things I thought were looking okay, right? Like I have an active queen. I might try to go after that pawn and, push my pawns forward on the queen side. But black has a number of reasonable moves, including attacking my king or playing g5. I'll let the interested viewer kind of deep dive this, but the main point is the engine is actually like spitting zeros here, saying no advantage at all. And the big problem is my light squares are weak and my king is vulnerable. This is everything I kind of was thinking about as I was trying to solve the problem. And although I ultimately failed to solve it fully, that's not really the point. The point, I think, for improvement is put in a good, genuine effort. Don't spend an hour on the puzzle. Maybe don't spend 1 minute on it either. I think the book recommends something like no more than 10 minutes. But the basic point is, put your thoughts out there and kind of reveal your thought process to yourself. In other words, if you don't document what you're thinking about and then you check it with the engine or, you read the answer in the book, you'll say, oh, yeah, I knew this, or yeah, it makes sense. But you kind of lose the organic thought process that you can kind of identify, reflect upon, and improve. So, long story long, we were looking at a blitz game. So I spent more time analyzing it than the two players spent playing the whole game. And in the game, Sabina played after rook c8, attacking her queen. She played queen g3, following her intuition. And I think the game went on to end in a peaceful result, a draw. But in their book, they pointed out the possibility that white can win with rook c5. So what was it that I missed? If we go through that line one more time, the queen captured. We try to topple the ladder with this distraction check, attacking the rook and the king. The rook does take our rook. We take the queen. But now this really kind of passive rook staring at a pawn becomes really active down the open files here. And after taking on a7, the rook can play rook c1, right? Pin the bishop to the king. And this is where I made an error. Remember, I calculated queen a5, rook d1, king f1, push the pawn, check, king here. And then realizing mate in one is, a mild inconvenience, I played g3. So notice I went as far or as long as I could without giving up the bishop. But in so doing, I waste a little bit of time and I ultimately push a pawn that will create some, light square problems in the future. So what did I miss? Well, going back, what I missed, rather than trying to hold on to everything with, queen a5 immediately, I could play a much stronger move here. And the move that the engine loves is king f1, a findable move, right? I found it a move later after queen a5, rook d to d1. I did play king f1, but by playing it now, I'm getting closer to the center and I'm going to have a more active and safer king without wasting as much time and without, creating some light squared weaknesses. So after rook d to d1, now you can play king e2. Very hard to kind of let go of a piece. But here you say, okay, you get my bishop with check. But after king f3, your rook is not ideally placed. It's not ready to quickly attack a pawn. It's going to take a little time for that rook to enter the action. Your pawn, is hanging here from black's perspective, and then my pawns can start rolling. So that's kind of the key difference. Like if they play g5 with my king here, then I get worried about getting checkmated, right? In that other example where the king was, kind of hanging out on g2 like this, g5 is a problem because once I play g4, my king is trapped and then rook g1 mate is a problem. So in the other line, by playing king f1, rook d to d1, king e, not queen a5, excuse me, but king e2. Now when the rook captures, I move to f3 and g5, not really a problem, right? Yeah, you can check me if you want, but then my king can move forward, could move to the side, could move diagonally. It's doing fine. And at the end of the day, I'm going to start marching my pawns up the board. So this was a really instructive example. And okay, it wasn't played in the game by a very strong player. And okay, it's a blitz game, so, you're not going to see everything. But even, I spent about 10 minutes, I think, trying to figure this out. I didn't work out all the details, and that's okay. And if you're looking at this puzzle and you're like, hey, I didn't even look at rook c5. I only thought about where to move the queen. That's just fine as well. Wherever you are in your chess journey, document what you're thinking and try to compare it to the game or the analysis and sort of figure out, what could I think about moving forward? So if you only thought about where to move your queen, a good kind of action step moving forward is like, hey, ask if I need to react. See if I can create some really good counterplay. And here you might find rook c5, right? Or like me, maybe you found this move and maybe you went down this main line and felt really good and you kind of stopped here. And you said, okay, at the end of the day, there goes their queen, good enough. And you kind of shut your analysis off a little too early. And, if your opponent has an active move, a way to put you under some pressure, maybe don't rush to cut off your analysis. In other words, there's an active move and an active plan to try to checkmate you. So here, you can dig a little bit deeper and find a move like queen a7, rook c1, and here I needed to find king f1. Very easy to miss. I think the big kind of learning moment here for me was I was trying to desperately hold on to that bishop as long as possible. But in reality, I should be thinking about how do I transition to the next moment favorably. So by playing king f1, sure, you get that bishop, but I get to, activate my king. And more importantly, now my king is, feeling pretty safe, pretty active. And what remains? Two connected pawns. I'm ready to take this one. I'm ready to push up the board. And my queen should be doing very well because the rooks are not going to have an easy way to create like a killer attack against me. It's going to take time. And in the meantime, I'm collecting pawns. I can attack the king, you name it. So that was a really good moment for me. Don't hold on to the material only for the sake of holding on to the material as long as you can. In other words, I didn't think about what is sort of my next step here. So rather than like, hey, I'm going to go here and eventually I'm going to have to give up that bishop anyway, what if I can favorably return material to activate my king and make their rook a little wrong-footed? And that would have given me the time to create my next kind of wave of attack. Well, thanks a lot for joining me for this rather detailed analysis of a really fascinating game. A lot beneath the surface here to discover. And I hope, the main takeaway here is that wherever you are in your journey, don't get discouraged if you're not seeing everything. Who is, by the way? Embrace the journey, throw out your ideas in the air, so to speak, and document them. Reflect upon what you're seeing and compare them to what you would need to see in order to succeed or, find a positive path forward. And that is growth. That is opportunity to reflect and improve upon our decision making and, how we're thinking. It can be frustrating at times, but hey, we're all in this together. Take your time, give yourself the room to grow. And as always, I'd love to hear from you. If you have any questions or ideas, feel free to respond to the video. And of course, I'd love to see you in the Improvers Club, Ask Coach, Ask Community Forum in particular. I'm quite active, so love to see you there. Well, thanks again, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.